Cottage cheese is one of my favorite high protein meals to have as a nutritionist, but there are a lot of cottage cheese products on the market and some are really great and others could actually be holding you back from achieving your goals. So today I'm sharing the 4 things to look out for and the 4 mistakes you need to avoid when buying cottage cheese to make sure that it actually helps you achieve your weight loss or wellness goals. Let's dive into it. My name's Autumn and I'm a certified clinical nutritionist with my master's in nutrition human performance. And the first really big mistake that is so common is low fat cottage cheese. Now you might be thinking, well, lower calorie should be better. I'll get more protein for the calorie content. Ultimately, it could be a win-win. But regardless if your goal is weight loss or health, you actually don't want to be choosing the low fat option. Because interestingly, there's actually been a lot of research around full fat dairy products, specifically finding that full fat dairy products are better than the low fat options for helping to maintain weight and prevent obesity. Now, this is probably because when you have the full fat variety, you not only get the protein, but obviously you get the fat. And both of these macronutrients help to raise our satiety hormones, peptide YY and CCK. And when these are raised enough, it literally tells our brain we're full, we're satisfied, and we don't need to eat, and therefore prevents us from eating more and more. And protein is the best at helping to raise these satiety hormones, but when we combine both protein and fat, that's like the magic chef's kiss combination to actually feel satisfied from a meal. So for satiety purposes and weight loss goal, you do want to make sure that you're choosing the full fat variety, and it just tends to taste better, but nutritionally, it's also a better option for most people too. And that's because a lot of the actual nutrient content is going to be in the fat. There are certain fat soluble vitamins, which means that they are only found in the fat, that they're absorbed in the fat, that are going to be lost when you choose the low fat or zero fat cottage cheese. The biggest one is going to be vitamin K2. Now we know that dairy is really high in calcium, and regardless if you're choosing low fat or full fat, it's still going to be high in calcium, but you miss out on the vitamin K2 when you choose the low fat, which this is a huge mistake because vitamin K2 helps you to actually use that calcium. It literally helps you direct the calcium out of your arteries and put it into your bones. So because of that, when we eat vitamin K2 along with calcium, it helps to prevent calcification of the arteries while also making our bones stronger. So when it comes to choosing cottage cheese, I always make sure to choose full fat cottage cheese and not low fat. But ironically, I think this message is actually starting to reach a lot of people because I don't know about you guys, the full fat cottage cheese is always sold out now at my local Whole Foods. It's actually really annoying. Okay, the second huge mistake is opting for the flavored or sweetened cottage cheeses. Now you typically will find the flavored or sweetened cottage cheese in those individual single packs. And because of that, it's only going to be about 5 to 7 grams of added sugar, which really isn't a ton of added sugar for most people. But because a lot of that sugar is coming from cane sugar or some other type of added sugar, you actually don't get a lot of fruit, like volume density of fruit with that same amount of sugar. And this is especially true because in order to actually make this a full meal, you really need to be eating 2 of those single packs, which means that the sugar content will then suddenly increase to 10 to 14 grams of added sugar per serving. And that's before any toppings that you might be adding to your cottage cheese as well. Now, I like to take a minimalist approach to my cottage cheese and just use sugar from whole fruit. This means that you get so much more fruit for the actual sugar content, and that fruit is going to be lower glycemic load because it's not from an added sugar source. So from a weight loss perspective, as well as from a health perspective of balancing blood sugar levels, it's a better way to get your sugar in. In fact, you've probably seen by now my absolutely viral cottage cheese bowl recipe that uses sauteed blueberries on it. It is so good. Probably the best way to have cottage cheese that I've ever had. Which actually brings me to the third mistake, and it's buying those single pack servings of cottage cheese. Now, I mentioned earlier that in order to actually have a full meal with cottage cheese and have that as your main protein source, you actually need to have 2 of those single serving packets. But most people, when they're buying those single serve packets, are just having 1. Now, one of those single serve packets will have between 14 to 16 grams of protein, which is a good place to start. That's actually probably higher than what a lot of people are having for a meal. But especially from a weight loss perspective, it is important to stick to meals and not snacks, which I've done so many videos on in the past. I'll have some linked right up here if you want to check out why. And in order to have a meal, we need to have about 30 grams, sometimes more, of protein at that meal. That helps to raise satiety, it helps prevent muscle loss, and therefore it also helps keep our metabolism healthy and strong during the weight loss process. And so yes, you could buy 2 individual servings if you actually are going to eat those 2 servings, and that will, depending on the brand, give you about 28 grams of complete protein. But at that point, you're just so much better off at buying those 16-ounce containers because you can just take half of that container and it gives you that 28 grams of protein. And then you still have the other half for the next day's meal or to use in other recipes. One of my favorite ways actually to use leftover cottage cheese, if there's any, which honestly is not very very often, if I'm honest. But one of my favorite ways to use that leftover cottage cheese is to put it into scrambled eggs. So like before I actually cook the eggs, I add cottage cheese into the eggs itself, scramble it up, and then cook it. This helps to really bring up the protein content of the eggs, and it gives it like this cheesy, fluffy, delicious texture. It is so good. But you can even make like a healthy cheesecake with it. There's so many ways to use that leftover cottage cheese if you end up having any leftover, which if it's like my house, then you won't. Okay, and then that brings me to the fourth mistake, which really isn't so much of a mistake, but a way to better optimize your meal if you have the option, and that's choosing the pasture raised. So I guess the mistake would be not choosing the pasture raised. So this isn't necessary. You can achieve a lot of really great weight loss and wellness benefits from having the other 3 criteria that I just mentioned. But if you're really looking to optimize your meals and make them the most nutrient dense that you possibly can, and better help support a overall health goal too, then opting for the pasture raised is the way to go. And that's because pasture raised cows obviously eat grass. And when the cows eat that grass, that's what actually helps to produce vitamin K2 in their milk. So when we buy dairy products from cows that are pasture raised, they're going to have a lot more of that vitamin K2, which is so important for both the heart and bone health, as well as dental health actually. A lack of vitamin K2 is one of the reasons why I believe I had a lot of cavities growing up, which I also did a video on. You can check it out right here. But most people just simply are not getting enough vitamin K2 because it's really only found in significant amounts in pasture raised dairy, in pasture raised eggs, and some fermented foods. So if you can get your hands on it, then opting for a brand that uses pasture raised milk would help to better optimize for vitamin K2 content. Now, if you're looking for a way to use that cottage cheese, you definitely need to check out that viral cottage cheese bowl recipe that I mentioned earlier. I'll have it linked right up here if you want to check it out. Also, if you're new to my channel and you love this science-backed information, make sure you subscribe right here. Come out new videos every Tuesday and Thursday. All right, guys, thanks so much for tuning in, and I'll see you in my next video.